Friends of friends.
Oh, Nick.
Hey, look at you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I'll just tell them.
Oh, use her copy.
Hey, Sean, do we have Wi-Fi password, individual Wi-Fi password?
I do.
At least you got to sit on the high part of it.
Yeah, that's pretty much. We'll see what happens tomorrow.
Right.
Oh, I see. They go in order.
Yeah.
I didn't put this in the front, so I think it may be pushed out.
Oh.
Find out, we'll just.
That sounds good. I was perfectly fine being over there. I just can't see like I could stay around the corner. Plus there was an exit door right behind in case I had to hurry up on these. Somebody starts to shoot. Right.
Yeah.
Or someone points
No, we're good.
Great.
Oh, I know.
Seems so special sitting on
Yeah, this is. Go up there.
All right.
Oh, yeah.
He's got to be a Montana gas hotspot.
Good.
Montana gas registered or Montana gas hotspot?
Try the hotspot first.
I think so. Yes.
Yeah, it shows lots of- yeah, it shows lots of-
Yeah, yeah. Just send her out. Just did that same thing.
Is he on the video?
Yeah. What's your month?
It is. I got it. Several.
Yeah, the other one, they may ask you for some
Stuff. That was a birthday for him. It was a couple chapter over. Bunch of little
Okay.
kids going to roll towards this. Was their foresight, really slow twist.
Yeah.
It's real, it's a real protect. No internet. It's a little heavy, but it's a, you can shoot up to 210 grains, although we're still debating when.
Are we live audio? Yeah, what are you shooting?
I was shooting 180, but we got my,
It does say recording
my
live.
friend passed away.
Wait, you know if we're live or not?
That's what we're shooting. Now
We're ready to
he's
go.
passed
Is
away.
Commissioner Byerth on there?
Tell me that's what you have.
Okay, okay.
That's what I have.
What,
I'm still
what
working my
bullets
way
are
back,
you
red
using?
money.
I haven't even looked into.
Just
it.
round for 69 caliber rounds.
Okay.
I don't shoot any disabled or any kind of.
I'm gonna-
Saddles are.
No, they're not.
Conicals would be. But I have not shoot. I think
Yeah. I,
the conicals are all.
oh, thank you.
Conicals.
Yes.
Like,
I,
that's what she has, April.
Oh.
Yeah, so I think the conicals-
I've never done, a non-scope muzzle gun. Otherwise.
I think we could go ahead and get started.
Oh, easy, no. My.
Please, go ahead.
24 by 24 still.
Chair Robinson, other members of the commission, and Director Warsek. For the record, my name is Quentin Kujala. I'm fortunate to be Chief of Staff of Fish, Wildlife and Parks. And with your tolerance, Chair, Director, I'll get this conversation started a little bit. Just what we'd, as staff, what we'd like to talk about and accomplish here today. And It's a great happenstance that y'all happen to be in Helena today because we've got a big meeting tomorrow. So thanks for that. And we thought in that context that it would be good to run through tomorrow, not in the context of making decisions, not in the context of the commission deliberating about the proposals or the subject matter, but rather to talk a little bit about process, where tomorrow sits in the broader biennial season setting process, where tomorrow sits in the context of sequence on the agenda, and is there a particular sequence either as presented in the agenda or different that maybe the commission would like to see us adjust differently, those sorts of things. And so with that in mind, what I propose we start with is just talking a little bit about what tomorrow represents in the context of overall process.
Can I stop you just for a sec? Is Commissioner Byers on there? Or do we have him on? Yes. Okay.
Did he say he was able to attend? I thought he said he wasn't able to actually.
I thought he said he was gonna get on
remote
Zoom,
in.
but, sorry, I just wanted to make
Last
sure.
I heard that he was going to be in the remote.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Can you reach out to him, Sean?
thank you.
Do you want to pause or?
No.
Okay. So, yeah, so tomorrow it has, and most of my comments here today, this doesn't mean we have to stay on these topics, but most of my comments here today will be directed to the wildlife portion of the agenda tomorrow. There's other topics, there's an enforcement item, and there's a couple of fisheries items as well. But again, most of my comments will be directed to those wildlife centric topics that are tied to season setting. Season setting that we're engaging tomorrow is the commission's first formal step on biennial season setting. By biennial season setting, I mean, right now, the commission endorses hunting seasons for most of the species in 2-year intervals. So the 2 seasons we'll be talking about tomorrow are for the 2022 hunting license year, starting next fall, and the 2023 license year, starting the fall after that. That's for most species. We will address wolf annually, and we will pick up the 2022 wolf season topic later this summer. And fur bearer is also addressed annually. There's also a piece of waterfowl that requires a connection to the Fed's U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. That's a piece we need to connect with as well. Other than that, so that's deer, elk, antelope, moose, sheep, goat, lion, bear, upland game bird, all of those are on the table tomorrow for discussions about what the next 2 seasons will look like, both in the context of structure. So that's things like beginning and ending dates, hunting district boundaries, what's the polygon that this particular season type is applied to, obviously all the species. Are they general license seasons? So the only requirement is a general license that a resident buys over the counter. Are they special drawn licenses like bighorn sheep, or maybe limited numbers of bee licenses or bull permits? Those are things that are structure. And all of those kinds of details are on the table for tomorrow's discussion, concluding in February. There's also a quota element of hunting season definitions. That's how many bee licenses shall be drawn, how many permits shall be drawn, how many lions will be on a quota, and when we get to wolves, how many wolves might be on a quota. You can pick up a specific quota tomorrow and put it into play. And if it gets adopted in February as final, it will show up in the printed regulation. If you do that, there's also on most species an opportunity for quotas to be revisited yet this year for the 2022 season. So after the winter surveys that biologists do, for example, there'll be an opportunity to revisit a mule deer bee license quota that the commission may speak to tomorrow in February. If that proposal from the region after their winter surveys is within the quota ranges, you'll see that there's a quota range cover sheet and a quota range supplemental material. If the quota adjustment that regional staff find after their winter surveys is within that range, it's an administrative step to make that change. So if the commission wants to speak to a specific quota, because that's the quota today you think should show up in the regulation booklet, you'd want to act on that tomorrow and then February. If the commission also wanted to make sure that perhaps there's a particular district you want to see what the change might be after the winter surveys, you might look at that particular district's quota range and you might narrow that quota range so that any proposal, that's not going to prevent a proposal outside of the quota range. That's just a message that, hey, if the proposal is outside of that quota range, I want to see it from the commission's perspective, okay? So again, the structure, conversations, date, hunting district boundaries, whether it's a general license or a drawn permit or drawn B license. Those are available tomorrow and concluding in your February conversation. And unless you specifically break open process, so to speak, they will be in place for the next 2 seasons. Quota discussions, again, they will happen additionally every year to include this year. So again, even after February, you'll have an opportunity, or staff will have an opportunity with your endorsed quota ranges to adopt different quotas. So just for that, I'll pause for a minute. There's some other pieces of process I'd like to hit on, but I just wanted to see if there were any questions of those sorts of details. Okay, not seeing any. I'd like to take a couple of minutes just to put the process that is January to February, I'm sorry, December to February in context. And so you have all seen either directly or bits and pieces of the scoping process in pursuit of regulation simplification that Director Warsek initiated earlier this fall. That has happened. Some of the proposals in front of you are a result of that process, and the justification you've read is this is in pursuit of simplification. There's other substantive changes that are in front of you that speak to a change prompted by something other than simplification. There's something about the resource that says, let's do it this way instead of that way. And of course, there's a whole bunch of districts and details of season that aren't specifically spoken to. And those are also proposed as well as a status quo. So the way to think about this is the last commission biennial season setting process put a season in place for 2 years. The flip side of that coin is at the end of 2 years, those seasons don't exist anymore because the adoption only ran for those 2 years. So after the 2021 season ends, and the latest example will be, for example, Lions, there will be no season definition for 2022. You will be putting that in place next year. So we have as a matter of practical reality, what you see presented, the bulk of the time will be spent presenting the proposals for change. But that's not to dismiss the proposals that are also there for status quo. Okay, just to make sure. So everything is on the table for consideration by the commission and consideration by the commenting public. So for example, you may spend some time tomorrow talking about a change in a pick a district, Antelope for hunting district 600. And someone comes to the podium during the public comment period on Antelope and talks about Antelope in 601, just grabbing numbers out of the air. You haven't talked about a change in 601. We haven't proposed a change in 601, but that person is fully within process as they advocate to you that there should be another change here, folks, and we should not propose the status quo for 601. We should talk about a change in 601 as well. So again, 2 kinds of proposals. The public oftentimes thinks that they can only speak to the changes that we describe to you or that you talk about. But in fact, all of the season structure, even those things proposed status quo again, are available for public input and for your review. Yes, sir. Yes,
Just procedurally, Quentin, is if we want to talk about specific districts like that, is it procedurally done that we typically would make a motion and vote on that particular district, or do you typically during season setting see like bigger, more overarching type motions versus I'm just curious about the procedure.
Yeah, it's Commissioner Siebel and Chair Robinson. It's a great question. And something we want. I'll give a real quick answer to that question just to capture the moment, and then I think it's probably something we want to talk a little bit more later on in the day. What we've seen in the past is oftentimes it's not uncommon. Let's just stick with the species of. We might talk about elk tomorrow, for example, and even as contentious as elk has been, there's a lot of elk that one motion may address. It's not contentious, seems like there's broad support, seems like the biology is well represented. And so we've seen, for example, to your question, a commission move all of this except this in a motion, and that moves this stuff, and oftentimes that's the majority of stuff, into, okay, that's adopted, that goes forward with public comment. And then whether it be one more motion or a series of motions that handle individual districts after you've made it finite that way. We've seen that as a common practice. Does that answer your question? Commissioner?
May I
Yep.
interject as well? Commissioner Siebel, another way, I think just the general way that the department and the commission has handled motions in the past is to have a motion to approve the changes as presented by the department and all other regulations that haven't been proposed for change. So in one fell swoop, you address all previous regulations and the changes that you've discussed at the commission meeting. And to Quentin's point, it doesn't have to be that way. It can be that you take them apart and handle the ones you'd like to talk about, and then perhaps a motion to bring all the, all the regulations from the previous season and pass a motion to address those as well. Does that make sense? Yeah, there's different ways to do it. We've struggled with how to do it in the most transparent way. So if there are any suggestions on how to do it, certainly we're open to those. So
A lot of roads to roam.
Yeah.
In that approach. Yeah.
We just don't want to take till Friday.
right, right.
Yeah. So conceptually, that's what we've seen within that is if there's a way, and we can help you with that, if there's a way to set most of the districts, and this is common, this is often appears aside, capture the motion, move that the commission endorse, except for these 6 hunting districts, the proposals as presented by the department and all other proposals for status quo, for example. That might move 95% of antelope into the adopted category, an example. And certainly we as staff will be keeping an eye and an ear open to help frame a motion as we see the conversation happening. And then we'll also, as staff, we'll be looking for pieces of a particular species season structure that maybe didn't get definitively caught in a motion. And it's not uncommon for us to say in season settings past where we'll say at the end of the species or at the end of the meeting, it might be worth just for clarification to make it clear that all of those season types from 2021 that were not proposed for change are adopted to occur again in 2022. Things like that. And again, we'll be watching as closely as the commission will be for those kinds of circumstances. Does that help? Okay. Whatever goes out tomorrow, this is a 2-step process. This commission hasn't been involved with some decisions that are 1-step decisions. You've seen finals, and in fact, you have some of those on your agenda tomorrow, where tomorrow's visit will be the one decision point that you have on that topic. In the case of biennial season setting, it's still the 2-step process. And so tomorrow's adoption by the commission is an adoption of, will identify what goes out for public comment. And then public comment will begin, certainly public comment begins at the podium tomorrow, and then it will certainly begin outside of a commission room setting through both online and in-person meetings and Zoom meetings with regional staff through much of January. We only break that off to make room for us to gather up all that public comment, summarize it, and then also get that public comment in its direct presentation to the department, also to the commission, so that you can have that ready for your review and ultimately incorporation into any changes or maintenance or reverts back that you entertain in February 4th. So again, tomorrow's adoption is only for what goes out for public comment. It is worth, and I'll look to Becky here to help me here, in tomorrow's adoptions, if there is a particular breadth of topic or breadth of options that you want to think about, you're not sure which ones you might want to land on, it's good to think about an adoption that paints those ends of that spectrum. You've seen some of those examples from the department before, where here's one way you can approach this, and here's a very different way you can approach this, and here's something in the middle that you can approach it, or the 2 brackets.
Are we gonna get a copy of this draft?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, you will have a hard copy of that on your workstation tomorrow. Yes, yeah. And that will be, so what Chair Robinson is speaking to is a hard copy of the draft regulation booklet as if all of the department's proposals were going to be adopted. That will be adjusted after tomorrow's meeting to reflect, here's what the regulations would look like if all of the adoptions made by the commission were to be finalized in February. And then we'll also change it again before the February meeting to here's what it would look like if all of the proposals again from the department. So you'll actually see multiple iterations of that by the time you get to the February commission meeting. Okay, any questions there? And so one more thing about range of options. don't hesitate if you're, if you're in a situation either as an individual commissioner or as a full commission, you're wondering, you're not really sure where to land. You got a lot of inputs. They're all going in different directions. And if you want to make sure you have a wide decision space in February, it's easy and quick to ask Chief Counsel Doctor just some qualitative assessment of the range of options. She's heard that question before and she'll be happy to answer it again. And we've seen the answer from Chief Legal. Expand the range of options to make sure the commission's comfortable with the distance between the 2 points, between the bookends, and sometimes the conversation itself is adequate at that point to do that. And then, of course, that's also influenced by the kind of public comment we receive as well. Okay. So something to think about as you think about particularly those things where it's really not clear on December. And in that context, the December meeting really does whatever else it shines at, the two-step process, it shines on those topics, shines brightly for those topics where the commission is just not sure. They're not sure because, maybe the biology is there to be debated. Maybe there's a whole bunch of different opinions that are coming in from the public. Maybe the commission itself is split. So it really does help those moments because it gives you the ability to put multiple options out or a range of options, bookend some options, bookend a wide range of decision space, send it out to public comment and let the public help you further refine it for your February conversation. Okay. Any questions so far? Okay, and then when we come to February, whatever is adopted in February, very different from the December adoptions, whatever the commission, the department, let me back up, the department will look at public comment. We will look at the commission's adoptions from December and we'll propose those or those with adjustments based on our digestion of public comment. That's what we will put in front of the commission again, much like we're doing tomorrow. We'll put together a proposal. That proposal will be, put in front of the director, and the director will say, "Yep, those are our proposals. Let's run with that." And then whatever the commission adopts, just for everybody's awareness, as you think about public opportunity, those things that you adopt in February that don't represent a change from your December adoption, those don't require public comment at the podium, from the podium in February. If something you adopt in February is different from what you adopted in December, and that includes a specific point in the range of options, then you are required as a matter of process to open the meeting up for public comment at that point in time. And then whatever comes up, I'm sorry.
So
Chair.
what if we have a range of options, as long as it was in that one of the choices, I guess?
We have, Chair Robinson, commissioners, we have actually said that if there's a range of options and you choose one at the end, you would still have to take public comment because there wasn't an indication where the commission was going and which one in particular you wanted to hear about. So that's a really good question though, because we, for example, with the wolf proposals, we had a range of options. We settled on a recommendation at the final meeting. We took public comment because there was no one particular direction the commission was going until then.
I follow up on that, because I thought the reason we had to redo the wolf was because there were a couple provisions in the motion that in fact were not part of the options. I had added additional things. I still think that if we put the array specifically, because this is a pretty significant thing where we were just talking prior to coming in here about trying to tackle this by putting an array of suggestions for all the contentious ones, for the very purpose of gathering all the comment and then just allowing us to make a decision to move on. And what you're saying sounds different now, that we would have to in fact take comment again. And I felt like the whole point of putting the array in front of them on tomorrow is to be able to select from the choices that we have and just move forward, because we put it out. We could pick any one of these 5, comment on all of them, comment on none of them, but you've commented, so we shouldn't have to ask for the comment again.
Chair Robinson, Commissioner Tabor, the point would be that you would take only comment on the one you're chosen during the final commission meeting, and you would not take it on anything else. So it's the case when we, the way it's set up, the practice that we've done in the past is whatever your change is what you comment on. So the change would be, now we're narrowing in on this one. And so if you're putting it together in any different way, if you're presenting it in a different way, that would be a change that then you would take public comment on. So it's kind of hard to, and maybe we revisit this when we actually get to the final meeting, because it's talking in hypotheticals now, but it really has been our practice that anything that becomes a change is what we take the comment on. And if there's not a change, if you say, here's my package and I pick this one and it's exactly the same, perhaps we then could avoid public comment at that last meeting. But if you've got all these options and you pick this one, and this one, that's a change because you package them differently. Does that make sense? It's harder
Yes.
it's hard to describe in hypothetical.
To me, it's a legal issue, and whether you have or have not noticed for the things that are out
Yes,
there. So
exactly. Yes.
we have noticed the array, because again, I use the comparison to how the Forest Service is following a very strict federal CFR process in forms on a forest plan revision. Here are 8 options. And then they don't have to go back to comment once they pick 1 out of 8, because that was the comment period to lead up to that. You're done, you move forward, and it's not back for public digestion or feedback and all that. And I felt like on the thing that pushed it for the Wolves is there were 2 elements of that motion that weren't talked about anywhere,
You're right.
and everything else was talked about.
You're right about that.
I
Yes.
feel like that was the difference. So
Yeah.
it just still feels like a little bit of a moving target to me every time we get this guidance about public comment or not.
Yeah,
I
it's
just want to
not
be consistent because it's so time consuming. I don't want to cut them off. But
right.
we've already heard it all, and it was presented as this was one of the many options, and we select one. Now we got to hear it again. It just feels inefficient and unnecessary.
Yeah, and we can revisit this when we come to a specific, what we were trying to stick with is a practice that we've done from the past. I can legally defend exactly what you're talking about if indeed we get challenged on it. Because our real responsibility is notice, clear notice, and the opportunity for public comment. And I think we've many times over satisfied that legal requirement.
So back up. I have a quick question. So as Vice Chair said, we got 5 crossings out there. We've got comments on. They decide on one of them. All they have to do is a public comment and that's when.
Yes.
finalized.
Yeah,
It doesn't have to
exactly.
go out for written comment.
Right, no,
It just stops. right
exactly,
there.
exactly.
Commissioner Siebel.
If we come up after tomorrow's meeting, if something happens towards the end of December, beginning of January, we come up with a new option, let's say the most brilliant option ever, an epiphany, can we extend the public comment period? Because we would have to have that and still be in time for our February meeting.
Commissioner Siebel, Chair Robinson. Depends on just exactly what the timeline is, but certainly in the realm of concept, depending on details, that is possible. Another thing that we've seen happen is commission moves everything else and then sets a phone call 2 weeks after that February meeting on that particular item. If the decision is that, gosh, we haven't got enough opportunity to provide public comment there.
Because I think
But
we only have 5 weeks in between because it's a little bit February 4th.
yeah,
So
yeah.
Right.
But don't underestimate the value. So always is the ability, the first place we assess public comment in that opportunity, in that circumstance, Commissioner Siebel, would be opportunity to comment at the podium that
Mhm.
day.
Yep.
And if we duly announce that, not only with the agenda topic, but with the clarification of what the proposal might be, or even with just the commission's discussion, because sometimes that shows up only in the commission discussion, and providing public comment at the podium at that day may be sufficient to the task. And again, these are all great questions, great circumstantial questions. And again, Chief Legal Counsel, Doctor, will be there throughout tomorrow for these kind of questions. Yes, sir.
I just wonder if you could, for a moment, pull up to a higher level on this. And you said at the outset, the objective was to simplify the regulations. I'm really interested in I know you have the open houses and some CACs between August and today. if you could just describe the process that got us to what we're looking at. And then number two, and this is really for you, Director, as well. Do you feel like you've achieved your goal of simplifying things?
You want to answer the first one, you want to take simplification first? Well, I'll take it. So the simplification was something I asked.
Hank, could you speak up, please?
Yeah, simplification is something that I asked all the biologists to look at it in two different steps. Say, what can we stand that will not harm from a biological standpoint, harm the research? Secondly, look at what are we getting for, it's kind of the social issues and combine them together and come forward. This was a scoping, something we haven't done in the past. We started earlier on this to get this done with an eye towards simplification on things. So a lot of this is simplification, bringing districts together. But when you come to elk, it's not simple. So that's where the problem is. We're coming into the elk portion of it. And this is where we're running into these issues, is because what they brought forward is what can happen biologically, a whole host of things. What the rest of it is social. And that's what's in front of you, all these options, these wide open options. That makes sense.
How about the process to get here in terms of staff involvement?
Sure. And so actually two public comment processes. There was a scoping and there was staff development of proposals directed to simplification earlier this fall. There was some outreach that went, what say you public on those? That outreach was received by staff and adjusted. And in some cases, you'll see tomorrow that some of those proposals pursuing simplification have in fact moved forward to tomorrow's presentation. Based on that early input from the public, some of those proposals were reverted back to what was in 2021. So then on top of the simplification changes, the direction went out to staff, okay, there are other changes out there undoubtedly for one reason or another that aren't rooted in simplification. They're rooted in some change in the resource that needs to be addressed, some change in the habitat security that needs to be addressed, some expanded season dates for an upland bird season or a migratory bird season. Those other kinds of proposals came on board. All of that came to the director late November before we finally had everything assembled. No, I'm sorry, early November before we finally had everything assembled. The director's office and the program head of things looked at all those proposals. In most cases, the region's proposals have moved forward. In some cases, that agency-wide conversation about what a proposal should or shouldn't be was morphed at that point in time, something different from what the region alone had proposed. And you see a mix of those both in tomorrow's presentations, Commissioner Walsh. Does that help?
Yeah, sort of. I got one other question. And that is, this is our first biennial review. Is it typical in the past to have this level of change in this biennial review?
Commissioner Walsh, Chair Robinson, we have had these kinds of big change proposals in front of the commission at points in the past, yes. A lot of the biennial season setting process do not have this sort of change, and from one biennial season setting to the other, you might categorize some as very routine. I don't want to use the word ho-hum. I don't know if any of them get quite to that level. And then there are this kind of season setting that you're experiencing right now is on the other end, where there are some big topics on the agenda. For example, I'll stick with elk in this example. There was a time, there was a commission, actually a couple of commissions where elk archery permits were a very large topic on the commission's agenda. Does that help?
Yep, thank you.
You bet, you bet. I wanted to, I'm sorry, go ahead, Vice Chair.
This is a question for either you or the director. So back to Commissioner Wall's first question, where I won't say mandate, the request from the director's office was to simplify and also specifically look at special permit across the board in all species and only preserve it if it's for biological reasons. Is it your guys' opinion that the regions did just that and they properly contemplated the elimination of a lot of that special permit stuff because it doesn't appear evident by the work product that they fed back.
Vice Chair Tabor, Chair Robinson, my experience, my impression of that process is the point that Hank made, separate out the biology from the separate out the empirical biology from the other stuff, the allocation stuff, the crowding stuff. I think to my eyes, the region did aces in that regard. I think worked very closely with the topic and with the proposals to do that. And we did hear, and as the conversation happened between the regions, out in the regions and the program staff on this here, there was tolerance in that conversation to hear advocacy to stay the course, even though the empirical biology would allow. So that direction, as stuff started to come in, got morphed a little bit, Vice Chair Tabor. And Director Warsack, I don't know if you'd add to that or subtract.
No, like I said, part of the direction was to look at this and see how liberal we could go to harvest out. And so if you look at it in that area, then I asked every biologist to be able to do the red face test. If we're 200 to 800% over objective, why do we have permits in that area? And they come back with a lot of good reasons why we have them. 380 is one. I mean, there's different things that we have reasons for that. A lot of them did not meet that. So I threw something out there and worked with it that was completely wide open, just to show the other extreme of this. And that's what took a lot of heat. And I threw that out there just to say, well, biologically, you can do almost anything you want here, and it's not going to harm the resource. Most of the social, and that's what the commission deals with. So that's what these things are out there for. And the other part of this is, I asked, as I've done this, I asked the governor to have to go ahead. They set a group together to work on these issues of landowner preference, the 454, different things like that. Because those are going to require legislation changes, not something the commission can do. So I wanted to get people talking, thinking about what is the expansion, what can happen here. And think about, so I think you're all aware of people have taken that and talking about it and sending ideas in and looking at things. So that I hope will help the commission come to something a little bit better. Does that help?
Yeah, I guess I'm still stuck on your first comment that you said, the edict was come back on, so, bright line identification of social decisions on all species, not just elk. And they did aces. And yet I didn't see one proposal come back disputing why archery special permits in areas that were over. Didn't see that coming back from the regions. Didn't see the change to region 1 or 2 on lions. Didn't see a lot. So I don't know how that qualifies for aces. Now, if the dialogue was occurring, it's all within the department and we didn't see where you guys got to, but from a commission standpoint, I didn't see it.
Yeah.
Still don't see it. So, and, I've raised this issue to you guys and it just needs to be on the record, that it's not as transparent as it has been portrayed to be.
Vice Chair Tabor, Chair Robinson, I appreciate that. And certainly where there is that question specifically tomorrow, by all means, let us know. And when I mean to say aces, we did see a dissection of here be how this speaks to the empirical biology, and then here be some concern, some considerations of allocation or crowding and whatnot. And yeah, in that sit down, and when the regions came back in and said, here's what we'd like to propose, there were some places where it did not go as simple as it could have, but some of those allocation considerations were supported and were restated in a status quo proposal, for example. So again, the aces was in the clarification of, again, here be the allocation piece of this structure, here be the empirical biology of the structure. And again, tomorrow, to your point of transparency, if there is any question as we get to whether it be a species conversation or a proposal conversation or a hunting district conversation, by all means, if you would like us to separate those pieces out, just give us a nod and we will do that. Thank you.
Madam Chair, if I
Go
could,
ahead,
please.
Commissioner Meyer.
Thank you.
ahead.
Apologize if I couldn't make it. I had a medical appointment just prior to the meeting, and then I got kicked off the meeting somehow. So I apologize for being late. In reading the justifications and the like, I really have to commend the field because there was a lot of analysis in those. I mean, there's a lot of documents to read, but I saw quite a few biological arguments of why special permits were in place or should be deleted. And I mean, there's I mean, just in my region alone, in Region 3, there's probably 15, 20 different permits that have been excised and generalized. So I'd have to agree with the statement that they really did hit it out of the park in many cases.
Chair Robinson, if I may, making sure I don't get in front of anybody, one more clarification I'd like to offer on decision space, an adoption in December and how that characterizes decision space in February. And I don't want, and again, I look to Becky to keep me on the straight and narrow here. When we talk about a range of options, or even one option that the commission moves forward, we don't mean to suggest that the only decision space you have is that literally specific option, whether it be the one option or these two bookends of a range. It may be this one option that went out, but there's an adjustment to it. Maybe the date runs a week later. Maybe the difference between a general license and a permit, instead of being 3 weeks and then 2 weeks, maybe it's 2 weeks and then 3 weeks. So I don't mean to suggest that it's so narrowly bound that if it's not literally what went out for public comment, you don't have room to adjust. That's again, when you have those questions, gosh, is this epiphany? Chair Siebel, to use your term, is this epiphany within the range of conversation that we had in December? Is it within the range? Is it reasonably close to what we put out? Do people have a reasonable expectation that this is something that the commission to talk about? Best thing to do is to ask Chief Legal Counsel. And then the last thing I'd like to talk about, and there's been some hitting on it already, is the presentation tomorrow. And so again, speaking to specifically the wildlife portion of the agenda, specifically those pieces dedicated to season setting. You'll see throughout the course of the day, there's a lot of scales that are coming to bear in some of these proposals, more so than others. And so I think across the day, you'll probably see Director Warsek chime in. You'll probably see Chief Legal Counsel Becky Doctor chime in. You'll likely see me chime in. And then you'll also see Division Administrator Ken McDonald carry us through the first layer of details. Those other persons speaking to use Commissioner Walsh's comment, kind of a higher perspective, or a larger, more general perspective. I just want to give people that awareness. And then certainly as you have questions, whether it be to the person making the presentation at the time or someone else that you know might, or that you suspect might have the answer, by all means, all through tomorrow, please do feel free to say, hey, I have a question, I have a follow-up, or I have an extension of that presentation I'd like to talk about a little bit, whether it be on the proposal itself or on the species, whether it be perhaps on the process or the clarification of the details therein. And then I also want to talk a little bit about the presentation that is something we've heard previously from the commission, and an interest in being as efficient as possible. I heard Commissioner Siebel's question as a motion within a species, but also as the ability, and it blends a little bit with your question, Commissioner Walsh, about what is the stature of some of these kind of topics been in the past. There are some species where the commission might think about, and we're prepared to respond, where you might think about, for example, receiving all of the proposals for moose, sheep, and goat in one presentation from Ken McDonald tomorrow. And then whether you picked that presentation up and made a motion on moose, sheep, goat, or moose, and then sheep, and then goat, all of that's available to you. And I think over the course of the day tomorrow, you will see some species groups that have a relatively small amount of change, lots of status quo, of course, and then also within that small amount of change, a relatively small amount of divisive input. And so again, we've tried to assemble the agenda so that to facilitate that sort of grouping in the presentation, and then whether or not the commission maintains that grouping in the motion or kind of pulls species apart or motions or specific proposals apart, we would look for the commission to manage that, and then we'd be closely tracking. Any questions on that? And again, we've been talking and looking for that. So you'll see us volunteer that suggestion, Chair. And if it's something you like, give us a thumbs up. If it's something you'd rather see us do separate, we'll respond accordingly if that works for you.
I think you could go ahead and do the presentation together, and then, I mean, even if we do separate motions, I'll go out for comment for all three or whatever at the same time.
Yeah, you could do, and I'd look to Becky. Yeah, there's like I say, a couple different roads to go on there. Okay.
And I usually, I mean, because the 2 minutes, if they're talking about 2 or 3 different species, I'll give them a little bit longer. I'm not gonna come off with 2, you know, but it's worked.
If you do.
Yeah. But it's worked in the past when we did it, so.
Yeah, we think it's worked well. We agree. We agree. And then specific to our presentation, you know, we've been talking, we've heard, and we very much appreciate this commission clearly digests the supplemental materials we get to them. And so we appreciate that and wanting to respect that. You're going to see us, and also recognizing the volume of detail that's ultimately got to be covered tomorrow through the master list. You'll see Ken be fairly vague as he walks his way through the master list tomorrow, and will continue to be fairly vague. You know, here's region 1 and elk, and you know, a general description of the kinds of changes you see. And we'll continue in that approach and let the commission's questions to us find the details that you want to explore a little bit more on. And again, we'll start there, and then we'll respond to the commission's lead as to get more refined or more detailed in our presentation, or to back it up even further, relying again on what you would like us to focus and spend a little more time on. That's okay with the commission.
Sounds good.
So that's what I had on process itself and place and process and how the day would roll out. I have a couple other topics that I have to offer up to the commission and staff, but would stand for anybody else if they have any other specific thing that you'd like to focus on. Again, as we all get ready for tomorrow.
I apologize.
You know, again, when thinking about that, I mean, I think today is a day, Becky, I would look for you to help. If there's a particular recommendation that's confounding, it's not clear, I think we can take today to, well, I'd ask you, could we take today to clarify what that proposal is?
You mean in
Let's say that,
materials?
yes, let's say there's an elk proposal that's not entirely clear to a commissioner. Could we take the opportunity here today to clarify what the proposal is?
I would prefer that would be on the record, because if it's not clear to a
Okay.
commissioner, it may not be
Okay.
clear to the public, and
Okay.
it might be useful to
Okay.
do that on the record.
Okay. Commissioner Siebel.
I had some questions about the elk management plan that came up in a lot of, and are you gonna discuss that, or you talk more about the timing? I know that we approved the guiding principles
Yes.
in the past. So at some point in time today, it'd be great to get some clarification.
Yeah,
on that.
you bet. Commissioner Siebel and Chair Robinson will take an opportunity here then to stay with the question. And so some of you may have heard the Director Warsek, and I suspect that some of you have heard from the public, wait a minute, for the magnitude of some of these changes, per Commissioner Walsh's comment, shouldn't we have the new elk plan in place to help us guide a little bit, rather than have a specific idea come forward and change that? And I think we think that's a fair perspective. The bottom line is, the bottom line that we've acted on is the elk plan is not in that sort of state of readiness right now. It's not there in its development stage to be a guiding document for this biennial season setting. We do look for it to be a guiding document the next biennial season setting. And then we would also say, while again, we think it's entirely reasonable to expect that kind of functionality from a finished elk plan, here's how we address this. Here's some ideas that we think have been effective in the past. That sort of guidelines, that sort of guidance that we'd expect the management plan to offer. We also think there is room to think about the sequence that we are in. And that is to say, are there some things that could be put forward either in discussion alone between December and February, or perhaps also in implementation that might, in its details and in its implementation and in the lessons learned, feed the development of the elk plan, as that will continue. And again, it's not going to be ready certainly by February, and it's probably reasonable to assume that next hunting season will maybe offer some experience to feed the final stages of the elk plan. That's just that kind of timeline that we're talking about for that kind of document. If that answers the question, Commissioner Siebel.
Just a follow-up question.
Yeah.
Do we have the ability, if there's specific areas, or if we make a mistake in this one and we don't like the results of next season, do we have the ability to make an adjustment in between the season setting next year?
Commissioner Siebel, Chair Robinson, that's a great question. And yes, you do. You do. I mean, and the commission has done some of that already, has revisited a decision that's previously been made. And there's nothing that is there's nothing written in stone that says it must be 2 years. Of course, if there's something out there that says, gosh, I don't think we need to wait another year to learn this lesson. Whether it be good, let's do more of it, or bad, let's not do this again. That prevents the commission from revisiting that. It would only take appropriate notice on the agenda, and then of course also appropriate a sense of timing to make sure the regulations reflect. That answers the question. It's a great question, and we do on occasion see that. And again, every year, including this year, there will be a quota change opportunity later on in the winter to include lions. Yes, sir,
Really a
Commissioner.
follow-up. Do you think the elk management plan will be completed in calendar year 2022?
So we would, Ken, I'll look to you. I'm making room for what I have painted. Here's my answer. I have seen the elk planning process track the biennial season setting process. So I would look for a final elk plan not later than summer 23 to feed both staff's development of proposals, public's digestion, and the commission's digestion of those proposals. And now I'll turn around. That's right. Yeah, that's the way we've been thinking it. So not later than summer
June of
23.
That would be a fine. So. in terms of commission, probably before, yeah.
So you would not have it to, just to further illustrate that timeline, the elk plan under that approach, under that timeline would not be available for a kind of a midterm visit to a regulation, but it would be available for the commission's next biennial season setting process in December 23 for the 24 and 25 seasons. Yes, sir, Vice Chair Tabor.
Just following up on the same nature of the question. So one of the, as it related to lions, there was a reference made to the lion management plan and the timing of that. There was also, I believe, a study done, a pretty substantial research project where, if I understand the process, it was getting finalized sometime this fall or whatever. I know that the plan itself won't be ready because the committee hasn't even been formed yet. So we're in the same boat with lions as we are with elk in that regard, in terms of having to set a 2-year look without the benefit of a plan. But what about the research project data? Is that something that could be made available to the commissioners?
Vice Chair Tabor, Chair Robinson, and I'll offer a first answer and give a heads up to wildlife staff to speak in greater detail. But the citizen work group in Northwest Montana has been assembled. And we do look for them to offer at preliminary insight, at least, if not something deeper than that, prior to quota setting for lions later this winter. And that group is sitting down and in essence going to be trying to ask and answer the question, so what do we want? What does successful lion management look like? Is it, for example, we want to minimize conflict with livestock. Whatever else the lion management does, we want to minimize it, as an example. And so we do look for that to start feeding the quota setting process later this winter. And then we would also say that the reason I keep hitting on the quotas is there are obviously at least 3 definitions of mountain lion seasons out there right now. And the reason I bring that up is it's each one of those we think has the ability to entertain this much harvest or this much harvest, to achieve this much harvest or that much harvest. It's how you go about that harvest in the context of allocation. And so we think that whatever comes out of February in the context of structure, we will be having an eye to that season structure and speaking with the commission to make sure that that season structure has the capacity to engage whatever quota fits those kinds of local objectives that that citizen group is coming up with. Does that answer your question, Vice Chair Tabor? And then I'd look to see from wildlife staff if there's anything there that was a misstatement.
Are you talking about the research that was in the bigger room?
Yeah, so there was a funded plan that was put legislatively, I think, not this last cycle, but the one before. And I think it was Jay's work, and he went for funding, got it. As I understand it, it's complete. It was being, properly, washed, or whatever, but But that's separate from the committee. Now, the committee, I had asked Brian, I asked you, I asked the director with regards to the construct of the committee and what they were going to be informing the commission about. Because in particular, I was curious if they were going to get anywhere near allocation or allocative issues. The answer was unequivocally no, not within their guidelines. And not even really quota, it was more about principles. Like the way it was described, and I very well could have misunderstood it. It felt a lot like what we just got done approving for the elk, where a group gets together and creates basically the principles and the ideas behind what we want to achieve, in this case, in a lion management program, but doesn't speak whatsoever to quota or season or allocative measures. And so as a document coming from a committee won't really inform the commission in that decision-making process. Certainly would in terms of guiding principles, but that's, that's the extent of it.
Yeah, and
Did I misunderstand that?
Vice Chair Tabor, Chair Robinson, Director Warsack, I'll take a stab and then you keep me on the straight and narrow. And so we are looking for the local group to, and again, what does successful lion management look like? Some guidance. If we were to get it right at the end of implementation, what would we have realized? And different perspectives are going to characterize different definitions of success. Again, I don't want to have any more livestock conflict with lions. That may somehow morph into not necessarily a specific proposal, but it might speak to a direction to send harvest, or maybe spoken more directly to reduce population. Those two obviously being related. That makes a connection to the research you identified, where we've refined, and no doubt will continue to refine through implementation, essentially a lion census process. And I use census not lightly because we think it's a very good technique to assess just exactly what is the number of lions out there. That's always been been a difficult thing to achieve. They don't gather on winter range like elk do, and you can count them. They're far more secretive than that. And it's also in the past been a great big piece of the first debate that the commission has in the context of quotas. Is, wait a minute, you don't even, how many lions are we got? How many lions do we have out there? And so, for example, to roll it forward, what that gives us is it gives us the ability to communicate a level of understanding that department does have about the lion population out there. That allows us to argue for this prescription or that prescription. We don't look for them to talk to specific quotas, just give us direction. And then it also allows us to assess effectiveness of whatever puts in place. So if, for example, let's say that, I'm just going to grab this one out of air, what the direction is reduce the lion population for some reason. Okay, I want fewer livestock conflicts. How do you do that? Well, we think if you reduce the population, you can do that. The census work allows us the ability to assess implementation directed to that end. We had 500 lions, now we have 400. Does that answer the question, Vice Chair Tabor? And then I'd also look to thing grossly inaccurate there, Ken?
No, so that group will make recommendations on basically what kind of a population objective are you looking at? You want to increase, you want to decrease, and then the quotas be, recommended by us, approved by you on how to do that. So you're right, they won't address quotas, they will address a recommendation for a population trend. And then we'll look for you guys if you agree with that or don't agree with that.
And nothing allocated.
Correct.
Thank you for that clarification. But the thing you also were referring to was local group, but this isn't a local group. This is a statewide group, right? There's not multiple line groups. There's just one line.
So the census work will move around the state. It's in Northwest Montana right now. So that's where the conversation is happening right now, with that understanding of what the lion population is. I don't know, Ken, can you speak to the sequence of where next we'll go?
Yeah,
Good and loud, Brian.
sorry, I'll go up there.
Yeah, for the record, Brian Wakeling. The southwestern would be the next one, and then basically each of these planning committees is tiered to build on the biennial season setting. So they use the output from the data that they collect through the what the spatial capture recapture, that gives them the data to work from. The department collects that. And so the next one would be the Southwest. That would be 2 years from now. Probably about 18 months from now, we try to start that one, so it has a little bit more lead time. Then it would go to Central. And at that point, there isn't a plan to have one for the eastern part of the state because the densities are so low.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm just curious how this is gonna, how you're expecting this to play out tomorrow in the meeting. So we've got, up or down votes on these proposed regulation changes. In my case, I can't speak for the rest of the commissioners. I'd say with respect to elk, I've rarely received, I haven't been on the commission that long, but I haven't received this much feedback, universally negative, on anything that we voted on today. And are we expecting that we'll go through each region and pick apart the proposal, or, and then we have the shoulder season piece of this where we've got two options. Please inform me how it's going to go down.
Yeah, that's a great question, Commissioner Chair, and it hits a little bit at, I think, Commissioner Sebo's questions about what the motion would look like. And so whether from the commission first or from the department, as we think about how best maybe to organize this. You could, for example, put aside, or not put aside, but identify a motion that addressed all elk that the commission was comfortable addressing. That is to say, all elk that didn't have, to paraphrase comprehensively, voluminous and negative input on, and set that proposal, whatever it be, aside for a more detailed discussion. And maybe it's a very short discussion, but capture that in a motion. Maybe the commission decides for its divisiveness, it's time to put out a range of options, or it's time to back up, whatever that might be. But the motion and the discussion is carved out to be finite to just those districts. And these other topics, these other districts that don't have that level of divisiveness, don't have that level of attention, might be far larger in the number of specific proposals and the number of districts that are addressed. But the commission may be comfortable moving that. And maybe you don't move it necessarily by state, maybe you move it by region 1. And very typically in the past, what we've seen is a commissioner from region 1, and this connects strongly to the legislative intent to have 7 commissioners, 1 for each region. Very typically in the past, we've seen the win, for example, if Ken tomorrow goes 1 through 7 on the districts on the regions for elk, we might see in the past, it wouldn't surprise us, I'll say it that way, to see a region 1 commissioner say, I move region 1 as presented by the department with the exception of this amendment, and stop there. Or maybe there's comfort in doing regions 1, 2, and 3. And maybe on the front end of that, the commission or the department says, we would suggest that we move this particular piece of elk for its own topic, whether we address it first or after all other things. And topics like that might be 8 districts that are proposed to be general license on private land and limited number of permits on public land. Maybe that's a topic that gets excised out sooner rather than later. A shoulder season discussion between shoulder seasons as they are variously described across different hunting districts versus let's have, except for some disease management units or units with really a whole bunch of small ownership sizes, let's have a late season by this 3-week definition. And we could have that, the commission could frame that conversation in such a way as to make sure the motion says, this motion, this adoption, either we endorse individually proposed shoulder seasons as they were defined in 2021, or we remove all of those and propose to replace them with a 3-week season. And in that sort of motion, you have spoken comprehensively you could have spoken comprehensively to the shoulder season discussion.
Can I just stop you there, Quentin?
Yeah.
This would be an interesting, set of suggestions 3 weeks ago, but it's 4 o'clock the day before the commission meeting. And I think the question is, how do we even get through tomorrow's agenda?
Sure.
When we don't really have specificity on what it is we're actually voting on.
Sure.
Because we have a proposal that stirred a lot of emotion and got the dialogue going, which is great. But, and this is what we said in, in our meeting before. I almost pictured like what I gotta do right after our dinner is go back and start trying to craft motions between now and 8 AM tomorrow to add structure. I think part of the little excitement I'm feeling is I don't see it coming together in any way, shape or form in the way you structure and conduct meetings. I mean, usually you have it boom, boom, boom. We know exactly what we're voting on and we know what the language is. And you're giving us a wonderful array of suggestions, but I feel like we're way beyond the suggestion mode where we're actually looking for, Brian and I talked on the way over and it's like, all right, do we take 7 things? Do we do shoulder season? Do we, take archery? Do we, So I think we're looking for a little bit more concreteness. Am I saying that?
Yeah.
Right, in terms of what your concerns were?
Yeah, and I guess my expectation coming in here was we were to spend 2 hours kind of rolling up our sleeves and trying to get there, but I appreciate the explanation on process and I understand we're behind the 8 ball here. We've got very little time to get something out for public comment. And for me, at least, it's way easier just to say, no change from 21.
And Commissioner Walsh, Vice Chair Tabor, and Chair Robinson, when I say suggestions, we are prepared to offer a division of motions like what I suggested. The reason I suggested is with the commission's tolerance. If the commission would like us to come forward in our presentation and our direction toward the scope of a motion, we're happy to do that tomorrow. And we would probably start with something like shoulder seasons, because if you address a shoulder season, then you can, however that goes, that's going to influence the motion, the discussion for the individual season proposals for the rest of the district. And we probably move to, I think we would be inclined to put the 8 districts that are generating a lot of comment last. And so if that were to go, then we'd have a conversation about specific proposals during the archery, general and fire and muzzleloader season for all hunting districts except for those 8 hunting districts. And we would march, we would then make ourselves available for questions on the specific regions, examples of those details.
But I don't want to have to go out 7 different times for public comment. I mean.
Correct. Yeah. And I think we could do that in that's where I say our presentation does not necessarily need to equal your motion. So we could provide all 7 regions in those details other than shoulder seasons and other than those 8 districts. And we could provide that in one presentation, looking to you then, Chair Robinson, or the commission to peel that apart into 7 motions, 1 for each region, or 1 motion for all of those out details for all 7 regions. And that's where I say, so if you pull apart those 8 districts, set those aside, and if you separate the shoulder seasons, then the question really becomes between the presentation and the commission's discussion, what remains in this district or that district that is of particular concern or interest to the commission?
How about if you give us some kind of a outline tomorrow?
Sure.
And it doesn't have to be filled out with the
Sure.
motion or whatever, but what makes sense?
Sure.
For separate motions?
Sure. You bet. Yes, sir.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, you would throw out kind of a large general proposal. We could then amend that into a motion, and then present that. So we could make our changes within our districts in that. It's going to be a huge motion. I don't know how you're going to keep track of it all, and then present that for public comment.
Yeah, and then, so that motion would then be translated for public comment, right? Public comment at the podium. And then if that goes forward, that motion then gets translated into that multiple item list on the master list. Those pieces of the master list that are captured by that motion. And Commissioner Lane, you represent another opportunity for a great example. So let's say that we address shoulder seasons, and now we're on general season definitions other than those 8 districts. And we present those comprehensively 7 regions in one presentation. We step back from the podium. And it may well be that in the commission's discussion comes to find out that region 3, for example, is the only region that has some change. In the past, we've seen that be addressed with one motion that says, and oh, by the way, in region 3, these are adjustments to the department's proposals. In the past, we've also seen that that circumstance turn into 2 motions. One motion for regions 1, 2, 4, 6, 5, and 7, and then one motion for the more detailed amendments that are tied to region 3. If that makes sense, if that helps, Commissioner. Yeah.
Madam Chair, I'm really confused.
Sure.
So what I want to explain, I guess, is tomorrow before we talk, when we talk about wildlife, part of it, I'm gonna go up and take the podium and explain my whole rationale, why I asked for what I did. And why we have these 8 districts that are such controversy and why people are so upset about it. Wanted to show that this is what could happen biologically. Anything you want to do on this stuff, you do it other than that. I'll take the heat for that. It doesn't matter to me what the commission does with this. The whole idea was to get people talking. You're well aware that they reached out to me, reached out to you guys about it. And they're actually coming now with solutions. So we don't have the luxury of managing elk where we want them to be. We have to manage them where they are. And where they're at right now is a lot of private land. And how do we get to them with the access? So that whole exercise I'm doing that. That's what this is all about, trying to get this done. Now it puts us all in a bad position now, trying to move forward from this at this point. But what way I envision, and Becky and Clint, correct me if I'm wrong, but if we can come out with something broad to start with, and then refine that for the commission get the input on that and come back in February with a final that makes sense, that you work things out for your regions. Then you only have to take the public comment on that during that time. I know it's gonna be hard to get to that, but does that make any sense what I'm saying?
Well, again, great fodder, but in terms of specificity of how like if I said our objective is we absolutely have to reduce the cow count on private land, and all the comments are coming, they're all saying the same thing. So we somehow or another need a suggestion, an actionable motion that says we're going to do this, this, and this. Some of the ideas that came through where we're going to give tags for tags or try to incentivize landowners to open up, give here unlimited tags. I've seen that recur over and over again, unlimited cow tags in areas over objective. Just no limit to how many we can do these out, both in state and out of state, I guess, so we can get these numbers down. Is that or is that not within the authority of the commission to do that one thing? It isn't to swap 15 for 1 because that's legislative. I think I heard Weston say, but creating an unlimited number of tags on private land. So it's a solution. Or do you want us coming back to you saying, look, it's clear that the division between public land and private land is a no-go.
Right.
We heard that loud and clear from the public. So don't worry, everybody. We're not going to do that. We asked the department to put together a plan where you go after these districts in a fair and equitable manner that accomplishes its 5 objectives. But that's not a proposal at that point. It's a mandate. It's like, go make this happen. This would ordinarily be what I'd expect to see in the way of a recommendation coming that we're putting in motion, but we don't have that. So the only thing we can do is ask you to go do it.
Which delays the process, right?
Right. And so that's the dilemma that we have here is we don't want to delay the process. Well, we can't. We got to do publications and all that.
Yeah.
So how do we get concrete? Because I personally don't like we're just not going to do anything because this process bogged us down, because there's a lot of people that have been waiting 16 years for some effectual change.
Right.
And waiting another 2 years is not going to fly for a lot of folks. So we know there's some targeted areas where we have to fix things that have upset people for a long time.
Yeah.
But we can still make a change next year, even though it's a biennial, you can still make a
Yeah.
change.
The quotas, yeah. And Chair Robinson, Vice Chair Tabor. So, yeah, all of that's available. So, for example, on the 8th, you could speak to, we would ask questions to your idea of unlimited B licenses in those districts that are over objective. A question we would ask in that conversation is, do you mean to replace the district specific or the limited number of B licenses that are also there? Or do you mean to add to that? We'd hear your answer. And we would look for that to be the conversation. And we would expect that sort of idea to come up in a couple different possible places. Either the discussion about Region 3's general season opportunity during the firearm season, or perhaps that's an alternative that is painted to the 8 districts that are proposed. Chair Robinson.
So Commissioner Tabor said it's only quotas we can change in the middle of the biennial season, or is it?
No, Chair
Yeah, we change anything, yeah.
Chair Robinson, yeah, the quotas, once we get done with February 2022, this coming February, then for the actually, you can, as long as you announce it appropriately on the agenda, you have decision space right up until the time the season starts. We'd have to figure out how to outreach something that's different than the regulation booklet, but you could do that. If we stayed in defined process, that's defined right now, quotas structure would no longer be available until December 2023. Quotas would be available for adjustment every year. But again, all of that, there's nothing in that that's statutorily assigned. There's nothing in there that's set in stone. The commission has need or desire or both to speak to structure or to quota. At any time, you can do that, as long as it's appropriately announced on the agenda.
May I just attempt stepping back a little bit to some of the comments I hear? I just feel like perhaps there's a misunderstanding about this. The proposals that come forward tomorrow are just that, they're proposals. But you can just adopt those proposals, send those out for public comment, and do much of anything that comes in for public comment at the final decision. Quentin, so there's still a lot of time. I know you want to try and get it right as you can for tomorrow, but I guess I would comfort you in saying these really are just proposals. Quentin's point about, if you've got something in mind you really want to hear from the public on, put those out tomorrow during our proposals, because then we will ensure we'll hear from the public on them. But we've heard a wide array of public comment already, from, yeah, great, from, how about unlimited? That tells me we're going to get a lot of public comment on the proposals as they appear right now. But that's not to say that we should just sit back and say, well, if I've got this in my head, I should just let this proposal go. That's Quentin's point about, Commissioner Siebel, maybe you've got some things in mind you want to hear from the public on. We should talk about those tomorrow. But this is just me telling you, this really is just the proposal stage. You've got a lot of leeway on this. We've tried to narrow it a little bit so that we can have something for the public to get their teeth into, but you've got options in February when you come, based upon public comment and based upon, what you would like to do in February. So,
Thank you. So for example, if I have a specific recommendation for the areas over the 920 archery tag, I might say, this is what I'm recommending, but this is what I was thinking, that it could be this or this. So should I make it, are we going to have a specific proposal that goes out, but have a discussion around the range of possibilities within there?
Can, yes.
It may or may not be friendly amendments. They're just discussion.
Yes, we
But
can
there
do
still
that.
is one specific motion, but if you were paying attention or listening, or if you're watching and the public, you'll understand that we discuss a range of motions. We'll take comment on that. We can change it. And then at the final, we've come to February, we adopt whatever we agree is the final on the committee.
Yes, absolutely,
So
Commissioner Siebel.
specific, but a discussion.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I was going to
Versus-
suggest that very thing when you were asking the question before. One thing you can call out on the record is, I'd like to hear from you, public, on X, Y, and Z. The proposal's this, but I hope you will also comment on this.
That's versus, I have this image or this vision of us having here's option A, B, and C, please comment on this, like we did with wolves. We did that kind of broadly.
Yes,
I don't, if we did that on every one of these, it would be chaos.
it'd be
Right.
chaos.
Right.
So we need to be
Absolutely.
specific, but talk if there's, 'cause there, I think we had some, we've had, I'm sure there'll be some interesting discussions.
Yeah.
Madam Chair,
Go ahead, Commissioner Byron.
thank you. Madam Chair, my experience in the last biennium was that if we didn't make substantive changes that were highly controversial at the tentative stage, there was very little guarantee that we would get an opportunity to amend those going into the finals unless the staff and the director's office was on board. So I would encourage everyone to make the substantive changes that you need tomorrow rather than waiting till the end. Otherwise, as you've already seen, it's a maelstrom of decisions and issues and public comment. Things get lost in the shuffle. That was my experience in the last biennium. And I was a rookie going in there, and I felt like I was not effective because I didn't speak up enough at the tentative stage. So that's my advice to the commissioners.
Thank you.
Yeah, question, Quentin. So Quentin, out of the 8 districts, could we come up with a proposal for the commission for tomorrow?
Yeah, there's
Because
no,
we've heard a lot of input on this thing that nobody likes the idea of going to general season for private land. Can we look at that and say, can we go into a drawing, separate them out? We've heard from several people saying a permit for public land and a permit for private land in those 100 districts. And bring that forward as a starting point to talk about on this, because I mean, that was the kind of the plan, is to hear what people had to say about that. And we've heard it loud and clear. They don't want to separate it. I mean, draw it to it as just a general license on the public or private. So is that something we could put in front of them, something like that? And then the commission could weigh that out and put it as a proposal. Can we do some of the things that we've heard information on as they've been out there, and bring that forward, kind of massage a little bit to help you with what you're trying to get through? Because
It would be very helpful.
I mean, that's what I think we need to do on this is come up with some things we've heard, come up with some ideas and give you some ideas, at least to get the discussion going better for you. Because, yeah, going off of this, there's a few of them that I think will be fairly simple. Get rid of the permits and different things like that, which was a simplification. But the big thing is the 8 districts, and the other thing we had is we're all the arguments are coming from. So how do we address that? I don't know if we do that right out of the chute or if we do it last, right? 'Cause that's what everybody's waiting
I would
for.
prefer to do it right out of the chute, and we've had other issues where we had motions that were kind of quieted everybody down.
That's what I was thinking.
Yes.
This is what everybody's waiting for?
Yeah.
To see what we do, what you guys do on this?
Well, I think the important thing is to let the public know that we're actually reading the emails and
Yes.
Right.
paying attention.
Right,
That's-
listening.
That's why I wanted, Commissioner Walsh, that's why I want to get up and, before we start this, and kind of follow my sword on, explain what it was. The idea was to get people doing it, now we're listening. This has got more, as we're well aware, more people fired up than anything I've ever dealt with. It was actually done for me, to get people talking and thinking about it. And the other thing I was gonna bring up, I know we always talk about biannual season setting, but can we go to an annual season setting? I mean, if that's that big a problem, I know it's a pain in the ass all the way around, but if that's our concern, we don't know what we're doing and stepping on this, or do we just stay with the biannual and give it our best guess with the understanding that it can be adjusted in between, we just wouldn't misstep? Because from my perspective, and I've said this in the things, is doing the same thing over and over again and thinking you're gonna have a different outcome is the definition of insanity. We've done the same thing for many, many years, and we're gonna try something new. So that gives that opportunity. And then with the understanding that you can readjust if you need to, depending on how this thing works.
If I may, Director, I think I think there's a tremendous opportunity to incorporate. I mean, we've gotten some emails from, I know Randy Newberg, others came forward with the proposed ideas. It's just so late in the going And it just feels like, okay, if not now, maybe it's the next biennial review of this, but to assemble a gold medal panel, maybe the governor appoints people or make a big deal out of, what happens next with elk in this state.
That's what I'm doing, sir. So I got to go ahead from the governor to do that. So when I did my press release, that was part of it, was get people fired. That was the rationale, bring these out there, get them talking. I've had a lot of people that want to volunteer to be on the committee. Randy Newberg's one of them. I'd asked him, I said, Randy, from my perspective, you've been throwing stones for a long time. It's time for you to move into the glass house and see what it's like to get that and try to come up with solutions. So I've got quite a few people that were asking that have asked beyond this, and they separate. We're just,
But that'd be the next
that would start,
biennial.
no, that would start right. That's it. A lot of these solutions require legislation. So this would be for the
Okay.
23 legislation. Two things are running in parallel. One is what we're doing right now on this. The second part is what requires legislation. A lot of the things we're talking about require legislation. And I've got the PLPW, and that's what I'm gonna give my report tomorrow, PLPW working on the access issues, the 454 issue, stuff like that. So we got a couple things going on at the same time. And this is what this group could do, is come up with legislation to help crack this nut. That is all.
But that doesn't
Help
fix
you.
tomorrow.
No, tomorrow, it doesn't, but if we could do the other part of it, ma'am, and bring solutions to you, or bring
Right.
better, and are we prepared to do that? for you?
Yeah.
So that's what we need to do.
Which I appreciate you making a speech, but without a solution following it is not going to help the situation.
So do you want me to give a speech of what we're recommending?
Push speech or whatever you feel like.
Well, I mean, what do you think would be beneficial, ma'am? What would help?
Yes, well, I mean, you can explain what your thought process was. And then here's a alternative that our new proposal or whatever.
Yeah, so for the 8 districts, we could talk about that and then follow down and bring that right out of the gate.
Right.
Bring that forward, just so we can work on that proposal. Thoughts?
Madam Chair, so if I've heard the commission correctly, and I've heard the chief of staff correctly, we've heard 3 or 4 things that are alternatives to the proposal on the table that we will prepare and present to the commission tomorrow as an alternative proposal available for your consideration. It won't get you probably all the way to the gold medal standard that we're hoping to get to in a couple of years, but it will provide some reasonable starting place that is an alternative to what I've heard from the commission is a non-starter, which is what's been proposed. So we can assemble that. We'll have that ready as part of the department's presentation tomorrow.
Can I just add one little thing, the newbie here? I think one thing we all have to keep in mind is that there's now this distrust. And I feel like I'm a right fighter. And so when I see someone, a lot of people, and I'm definitely in the thousands of messages, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, text messages, our phone numbers have all been given out, and they're on the website, but on social media. And so it's just been nonstop. And what I'd like to see is maybe coming out with a statement that squashes the #1 thing that is in every email is catering to the wealthy landowner.
Right.
If that could get squashed right away, I think people are gonna feel diffused and maybe understand. And it's what I'm scared of is that lack of trust. We don't want that in the public, and coming from a public relations perspective, I think we need to do something about that.
I would agree with you 100%, ma'am. I think that's what we have an opportunity to do this. So I think everybody's aware of when you got appointed selected. There's been this thing right now. There's always been a concern of what the commission's going to do. And I've heard a lot of stuff saying, you have it at the Capitol, you have it at the Supreme Court Justice Building, so you can look down on people. I've heard that from several people. Those are the type of things that are coming out of this. And I think I agree 100%, we need to dismiss this. The only way we can do it is just take it head on. And I have no problem with doing that tomorrow. And saying this is what it's all about. Our goal here is to try to do the best we can. And I'm going to emphasize that we don't have the luxury of managing bad, good elk. We have to manage elk and where they're at in a lot of places on private land. And how do we work with landowners to keep the rights? We're not catering to them. We're trying to figure out how to work with them. And that's one of the things that we set. I promised the governor when I took the job, we try to bring people together, come up with solutions. No, I know it looks like a driving line. That is actually, it's just like. You saw it, I will own that.
So in response to your question, Dustin, I almost feel like we have to take those districts and that whole proposal and just take it off because it was done for a very specific purpose. It achieved its objective, brought people to the table. But there were some really, I think, viable concrete proposals that were brought forward by a number of groups that spent quite a bit of time and energy on it. Like, UPOM put together a proposal, so did MBA. I think MOGA might have, I don't know if they did or not. But if I go back to the archery scenario, that we know the history on the archery permits and what brought that back. I think we all know that we were going to have to make some kind of change to that very specifically. The question was, well, then what do we do? Because we still like some of the attributes, and we're also concerned if we do go to an unlimited permanent scenario, will that create this flood of people, and would there be some specifics that we could put in? And I've seen it come from 4 different groups now that are all in agreement, at least on archery, that we go back to the unlimited permit, but we could go to a choose your district scenario so that it would specify where people would go. And that would control this overwhelming response that may or may not occur. That seems like a pretty practical solution. Your 3-week season for shoulder in areas over objective, both public and private, it's pretty direct. It's pretty simple. It's pretty uniform. I think that's a good candidate. I feel like we could come up, Brian, you had 3 or 4 more that you were thinking of. I feel like those are the kind of proposals that I want to see. What I think I'd be real uncomfortable with is, this thing where by the time we get done rereading it and looking at it again, there's going to be errors like what happened to some of our other motions. And then, we're walking it back. And I just don't want to go down that road. It makes us all look so terribly foolish, and there's no point in doing that. So.
And I think to Jana's point, it doesn't enhance trust.
No, not at all. I think every commissioner should state for their own right. I know I plan on that. I had no part of doing that, and I still value the 3 things, which is, access for everyone and taking care of the resource. And those are my principles. So that, this was an idea that came up and it got you involved. Great. But believe me, I ain't voting for it. And so, because I need the people to stop hating me just for a second so I can, go back through, as much, as if they didn't already have as many reasons as they had already. So, and it's the same thing. I mean, some people put some good energy and some good recommendations for it. And it seems like that's all getting lost in the shuffle of this firestorm.
Keep it simple, please, as possible.
Just a question, a procedural question, go to what Commissioner Byers mentioned. There was some fantastic work. These justification documents, there's a tremendous amount of work done by a lot of the regional biologists. And I'm curious, like if we make a proposal about archery season, going to general, I know a lot of them, specifically like looking at 411 and others were opposed to it. How would we expect them to get involved? And will they be involved as part of the process of the department commenting if we put that forward as a proposition or as a proposal with kind of a range? Would we also expect the department, how will they be weighing in that process? I guess the individual regional biologists, if they have a lot of pushback.
Commissioner Siebel, Chair Robinson, that would come through the public comments through January and the department's digestion of those comments and incorporation or another into the final proposals from the department. And the starting point for that conversation would be tomorrow's adoptions from the commission.
So the biologists would be part of the public comment.
So the biologists the agency would comprehensively look at public comment. So here's what the commission adopted in December. Here's the public comment. And here's some other stuff that the agency thought about that didn't think about on December 14th. And with those inputs, we would recommend that this December adoption be proposed as it was adopted in December. Or we recommend as an agency of this December adoption be proposed with this adjustment to the definition based on public input and or additional agency assessment.
Thank you.
Yep. So I do, Chair Robinson, I do think there is an abundance of overlap here in what we were talking about, and having great respect for the comment earlier about some details, that made the literal communication of the motion difficult at times, and for staff required us to, look back into the recording a couple times before we finally got, and that's all well and good. We found our way through that. One of the ways to address that is to go more general. So for example, you'll see us looking for common threads between hunting districts in a proposal. So for example, if there's and we'll sit down, we'll think about this. I'll just use an example. A proposal, whether it be from the department or from the commission, that addressed in similar fashion all of the 900 districts, that actually becomes a very easy motion for us to frame and apply, because you got a bounds on what you're speaking to. You're speaking to all of the 900 districts, and you got a singular definition about what you propose to do with those, move those to unlimited permits, just as an example. And so those are ways, and we can work, Director, per your direction, to frame some of those examples. Very simple motion that actually throws itself across all of the 900 districts as an example. And then from that point on, the archery season in those districts, the archery season in those districts that relates to bull harvest has been addressed. And you can frame the motion to make sure that any subsequent elk conversation, and it's on us to monitor this, about one of those districts doesn't confound the 900 adoption.
So just a background question on the shoulder season adjustment, or the option that's been thrown out. What was the genesis of that? And I mean, is the department advocating for the option that they proposed?
Just a 3 week.
The 3 week.
Commissioner Walsh.
Which, by the way, is very unpopular in my neck of the woods.
Funny, because we heard it when we went around the state, that people were saying they were sick of hunting elk, or they did this, not fair to the elk. We gotta come up with a better way of doing this. That's what we heard in different regions as we went through and saying the shoulder season, extent, we're hunting them, put pressure on them way too long. So what's a better way of doing this? And then there's areas like we talked about that we'll still have the shoulder season, but for disease and different things, not put pressure on keeping the elk separated from the cattle and things for brucellosis, so that we're good for doing things like that. As far as the harvesting, we heard from a lot of people say, why don't you just hunt them hard for 3 weeks, private and public land. It kind of goes back to Vice Chair Taylor about the idea of this shoulder season this year, to see what happens if you hunt on private and public land for shoulder season. So if we're trying to get harvest done, trying something different. So that was a rationale behind bringing that forward. We heard from people. So in your region, you're hearing that they don't like it. Right?
Sorry,
They kinda
Hank.
feel like
Hank,
they
I'm
feel like
sorry, I
federal-
can't hear you when you speak.
Oh,
You raise your voice.
Yeah, I turned my head too, sir. I'm sorry. I was looking at the
Oh, it's fine. I'd like to hear what you're saying.
okay. So what I said, that came out of us going around the state and hearing input from different people, some of these ideas. And one of them was actually Region 6, a couple of people were very, very upset about us hunting elk way late into February. And the late part of it. And then the other issue we've heard from people saying, it's kind of detrimental when you field dress an elk and it's got a good sized calf in it. It's hard on people and different things like that. So we looked at this and said, well, there's a proposal to try to say, why don't we just hunt elk for 3 weeks and be done with it? And give the opportunity to landowners and the public to kill elk wherever they're at and bring the numbers down. That's what the rationale was behind bringing that one forward.
Thank you.
May I comment? I don't know if it's okay to comment on this kind of stuff, but the things I've been hearing from people is in a lot of these areas, the elk don't even show up till after the 1st of January. So basically, if you limit it to 3 weeks, you're not going to get much of a harvest. And these are from some fairly large landowners that are willing to open up their place, but they said they don't come back until January. So that's why they're afraid of losing that that longer season.
Yes. I think that's what these things will go out and get those comments back. That's the whole idea behind it is hear what they've got to say.
I can't say, I like the fact that we had option 1 and option 2 very distinct here to consider. And I know it's the easiest one probably in this list to do. But, here's an alternative to what we're doing now, or here's the status quo. I like the fact that was up.
So there's a few things, and I assume this is the right forum to ask that, where I look for them, I can't find them. So the infamous pheasant season, where the guy comes in and he requests, and you even mentioned that in our meeting before. I've looked at all things road, Dublin, Gaper. I can't find where the department ever considered it, and I don't see his public comment in the package. So that doesn't look like what I had asked for, because I want to be able to tell him, yeah, it went through the sausage making factory. It was deep, it was considered, and he can see it for himself if he looks at the documents. I can't find it. So without me knowing that he wants that, there's no place in this entire packet that was assessed.
Yeah, Vice Chair Tabor, Chair Robinson, thank you for that. And so that it is on the commission agenda. It's in referenced documents at the bottom of the agenda. And that one is there. It's a handwritten note. It's a scanned copy, plus a couple of others of that, that kind of proposal that we've heard not only from the public, but some reference to it from the commission or commissioner. And so with that being posted that way, and it's like I say, you don't see cursive longhand very often, but that's one of them.
Is it under the informational tab?
It is under, look at the bottom of the agenda on the website, and I think we call it referenced documents. It's near the bottom. There should be 6 items there. And so we will reference it. We'll very clearly reference that Vice Chair Tabor in our Glenn Gamebird presentation, and we'll also make a connection on a verbal presentation, how we responded to that. In the case of that, there's not a biological impact, but there's some other considerations.
Okay. Similar to that, then, we've all heard from, because we took the time to do the special working session with the houndsman on the black bears. And both the way the statute's written and everything else had defined where this was going to happen. And there was going to be opportunity originally, and I think legislatively intended to be in Region 1. Now the proposals come out where virtually there is no hunting in Region 1, which, as I think I'm sure you're aware, has really created a great stir by the sponsor, everybody. I assumed that it had some connectivity to what's happening here with the grizzly bear, both the MOU as well as the petition that's being filed for NCDE, but they appear to be different issues. And so maybe this is something you want to inform in a bigger public setting, but I for one was pretty disappointed to see that change without seeing it coming, and then getting once again a lot of heat for it without ever knowing that that was a decision that was going to be ultimately made. So if we are addressing that tomorrow and it will all become very clear, then that's helpful. But that is a super sensitive item for a lot of folks right now. They're pretty upset about it, as I'm sure you guys know.
Yep, Vice Chair Tabor, Chair Robinson, thank you for that. And most certainly that will be one of the points where we downshift the gear and talk in considerable detail in our presentation.
And we're theoretically allowed to do so because, I mean, is this once again in threat of litigation that we're making this decision? Is this the recommendation coming from the department? Is it they were for entirely different reasons? When we're looking at it from the wolf and them using ESA and the loss and the application of bear, that was made sense to me. Why we had to do that, didn't like it, and don't like to make decisions based on somebody holding a gun to your temple. Is that what's happening again? Is somebody holding a gun to our temple on this deal, or is this, and again, that feels more like a legal question that I could ask today. Is that okay?
Sure, yeah.
Vice Chair, you want to go?
You've tried a few times if you want to go ahead.
Just very quickly, very coarsely. I mean, there is a Vice Chair Tabor, Chair Robinson, there is a connection to grizzly bears in that conversation, just as there was a connection to grizzly bears in the wolf traffic conversation.
Yeah.
So basically, you've got an area, as you said, no for wolf, but you're gonna say okay for hounds. And it's the same grizzly bear thing, it's the same thing too. So it's the same.
But it's
It
a
is not a
completely
threat.
different application.
And it's not a threat of litigation in this
not.
circumstance,
It's just.
like it was with wolves. So it was a consistency.
But I mean, one could argue, and I guess this is what will be fleshed out in public comment and all that, that they really aren't comparable, because there, what we were talking about primarily was the opening of trapping
Mhm.
and leaving that into a judgmental environment and the application of snares.
Yep.
Two very different things than what we're talking about hounds. And, you know, in the application of hounds, especially in the spring, just a whole different set of circumstances. So consistency would seem to me that if we're doing the same thing in the same time frame, in the same year, but here we're doing it at a different time of year with a completely different application. The only commonality at all is the topic of grizzly bears. And so, but from a legal standpoint, I guess it will probably be asked of you, I imagine tomorrow, that we get back to this intent of legislation. I think the legislation was pretty clear. I almost want to say, didn't it very specifically indicate, except for the grizzly recovery zone? I think that it actually said that in statute, but if not, can we visit on it? Because that's the topic that's come up to me, is like, well, if it says it in statute that it defines specifically where it's supposed to be, and now we're walking it to a bigger footprint, which of course I imagine is within the purview of the commission, but I think if I was a bill sponsor, I would say, that's why I put it in there, wanted it to be just that, no, not unlimited. So anyway, we can expect a little
Discussion.
emotion on that as well.
Just to,
Talked to him several times.
and just for clarification's sake, another consistency piece is that take defined by the Endangered Species Act is even chase of a grizzly bear.
That's what I tried to explain, but
I bet you did, yeah. It's hard one to
but
comprehend.
during legislation, none of that came in the way of advice or counsel or anything else. So they were able to get it to the legislative piece with no challenge on the take. So now all of a sudden at the commission level,
Yeah.
it's coming up.
We brought it up during.
Right, but the legislature,
I'll have to listen to it.
yeah, right. Yeah, no, I saw it. It just had no connection to the rest of the game group, so glad that you'll point it out. And I guess on an example like that, so you heard from a few private landowners. How, is it anecdotal? Is it statistical? How representative are the few landowners? You know, is it 7,000 landowners? Is it 5? Is it one really wealthy donor? You know, so, because most people I've talked to would love to be able to hunt.
Yeah.
In fact, I think at least 2 or 3 of the staff said I would find, I mean, yeah, no, upland game birds through January 15th. So I just, and that landowner can of course opt out, right? So. Yeah, I'm just curious as to why the department selected that. And what the process was. And again, if that's something you'd rather answer tomorrow.
Madam Chair, Vice Chair, House Bill 468, and there is no, the language does not speak to where it may or may not occur. It just simply says as authorized by the commission.
Okay. I think it must have been then in the public comments or whatever, where they were trying to assure everybody that if they pass this, they're going to take care of the grizzlies, but it wasn't hammered out in the legislation.
Something that, on that same subject, there was a lawsuit filed just this past, it might have been Friday or even today, against Idaho's trapping regulations. Have you all seen that? And it was based upon the liberalized trapping season in Idaho and the potential for the incidental capture of lynx and grizzly bear. And the plaintiffs in that case are several Montana groups. And so we haven't yet seen that same litigation filed against Montana. So I think it's too early to say, but I hope that's how it remains.
I don't think we're ever going to be done with that issue. So let's just know what's what's on the plate this week.
No. But I hope your thoughtful regulations may have paid off, so I won't hold, or delayed, right, exactly, Chair.
We want to make sure and meet your guys' expectations for tomorrow. So I want to restate this and in good part, so we know we understand what you expect. And so some folks here understand, or maybe can even ask a question or two, so they understand for sure what's expected. So what you really need, like you said, Chair Robinson, is an outline of motions, that are logical, stepwise, that take a few things off the table that we know are not going to be liked and good ideas, but then are a progression through the regions that are logical, bite-sized pieces of motions, basically, that aren't, so it's not 100 motions out there, but it might be a dozen motions that we deal with tomorrow. Is that right? Just to,
Preferably not a dozen.
yeah, maybe it's half a dozen, maybe it's half a dozen, yeah. But just for example, we do a logical progression of motions for you to follow. Does that work for you?
Think this way first. Before you start with broad ones.
Yeah.
rather than cover
Yeah.
everything
Yeah,
in there.
those,
Yeah.
and then if need be, there may be some region by region.
Yes.
Okay. And so, Brian, the folks putting that together,
You guys aren't going home.
yeah. Is that something you sort out easily and say, oh yeah, that, I mean, Quentin started down that road already. Yeah.
We will.
What's your thoughts on what will be for Lions in that same regard?
I think for Lions, what we have been planning, so it's a great question, is we've been planning a description, a dissection, the thing that regional staff did very well, dissection to make very clear to the commission, knowing that there's an allocation debate on Lions, making very clear to the commission what piece of a proposal, this kind or that kind, and we can offer some examples. What's that proposal's potential is relative to managing the resource, the empirical biological assessment, that season structure relative to the resource. The rest of the structure then being identified as being associated with social considerations, for want of a better word. But the short story is that we have at least right now three types of mountain lion seasons on Montana's landscape: the Region 1 model, the Region 2 model, and the rest of the state model that is general license quota. And all of them have the ability to incorporate a particular quota of this size or this size, trying to drive the population in a particular direction. So empirically, resource management, thinking about the lion resource itself and what you want to do with the lion resource at the end of management, all of those options are available. So it's a discussion then of the social pieces.
Okay, so if I interpret what you're saying, which sounds remarkably diplomatic, it sounds like you're saying we go from general tag to special permit, and they're all viable methodologies, and they're all supported by science.
They're all supported by science. We would probably also tomorrow take a little bit of time and say, well, surely there's more to that, Quentin or Ken, whoever is at the podium. And we have experience with things like competition under general quota systems, quota overruns, how to manage that, and making sure all of that can be managed.
That's all social though, right?
Yep. We won't be presenting that as things that the season structure can't figure out how to handle. Maybe that's a reduction in the quota next year. Maybe that's a refinement to the reporting process when you harvest a lion. All of it can be managed. And again, so it is really what does the commission prefer in the context of this allocation process or that allocation process? Because the department can make all of them work when it comes to managing the resource.
So the part that really kind of didn't get addressed in the memo or what I think was being implied by the working committee coming downstream is the value system and what we're trying to do here. It's perhaps the most complex animal because of the way it's classified. So we're managing it as a game animal, and yet it's a predator that has a profound impact on the other animals. So it's no mystery to all of us. We know the history. So Region 2 got its version because there was a lot more pressure by commissioners, county commissioners, and what have you, in trying to get better control of the predator side of the argument because of the outcry of all the citizens down there, the impact it was having on the ungulates. Whereas in region one, they were much more holding on to the quality issue and having a quality hunt and really treating it as a game animal, in fact, as a trophy animal. And so that was a treasured set of objectives or principles there. So you have two different regions establishing two different sets of value systems. And this is where I thought we were going to get to, maybe the changes as a department and whole and say, no, we really are the state of Montana. So we don't have different value systems by region. We may have different biological conditions on the ground, which cause us to do things differently. But in terms of a value system, we should be relatively consistent. Because as we know, we have these unintended consequences. And so people leave here and go over here because it's not doable here, but it's doable there. And so we've had a lot of, unintended consequences. I just don't know if we want to get into all that. Maybe we do, I don't know. I just kept trying to create a condition that says, really biologically, there is no reason to do this. There was a condition 20 something years ago under a variety of different other things that existed then, virtually none of which exist today. Like the same players aren't there, D4 got, there's a lot of things that have changed. And therefore, even the social assessment isn't as accurate as it once was. That's why it would cause somebody to want to look at it. So if it just means just make your motion and we'll be done with it, I can do that. But I was just hoping not to have to do it that way.
Yeah, thank you, Vice Chair, Chair Robinson. Certainly, we did not approach Lions from the standpoint of putting in place one Lion structure across the state. Again, there are 3 right now in place. And so you're right, that was not our intent as we sat down to think about Lion proposals.
Wasn't your intent to get to 3? It
wasn't our intent to look at the 3 examples of how to 3 definitions of a lion season. Wasn't our intent when we sat down to get those to 1. That was.
And why was that?
I think the first thing I would offer up, just at a first course scale, to reference Commissioner Siebel's approach to things, start broad, is all of them, particularly the one in Region 2 and the one in Region 1, just has a history that the general license doesn't. And so you see staff first deferring to that history, being hammered out over multiple legislative and commission sessions today. Right, wrong, or otherwise, I think that's fair to say. You see us deferring to that, respecting that. Not to say that it can't change. It's fully within the decision space and the authority, and we're happy to talk about just exactly what are the repercussions of, or the impacts, or the results, or the concerns, or the advocacies for this allocation system versus that. Certainly happens with that. And given that there's 3 different examples, we can point to the other example to talk about, or the history to point to help manifest, to help illustrate what those things would look like.
Roll-ins for everyone.
Followed by roll-ins.
Yes.
It does, again, I do think that, so we'll work on some organization, way to think about some amendments for more species, or some proposals, some species more than others. And then I would also say that we'll be watching close. You may hear us asking you to repeat the motion a time or two to make sure we've got it correct. You'll see us working hard to make sure that the motions have a discreteness, so we don't walk away from tomorrow and there's some fuzziness between 2 motions that seem to say contradictory things to the same zoning district. We'll be watching hard for that. And then also, someone else said something here that what is concluded tomorrow is what goes out for public comment. I don't want to say just, because that's important, but the reason I say that is so further we can all expect and look for, you expect us, we to look for, out of the benefit of that public comment, a further refinement for February's conversation. So process here helps us. It's both forgiving and stands to be more informing for those things that were not clear just about, that the commission's not clear on just exactly how to proceed.
again, because I might have not seen it, but is the issue of revisiting the closure date for fisheries on Big Hole, where we might have been a little aggressive on closing that, is that up for consideration for decision tomorrow?
Vice Chair Tabor, Chair Robinson, that has not been announced on the commission agenda and so is not available for action tomorrow. I look for Becky to,
That's right.
the two fisheries are fish removal projects and commercial bait seining waters.
And the Madison River.
That's Wednesday.
The arm rule hearing is Wednesday, and then the commission is scheduled to take final action. I think it's on the 27th.
Okay, that's.
What are we doing on Wednesday?
Wednesday is, so that is for sure a staff requirement, and that is the arm rule hearing.
Yes,
Correct.
but it's not a requirement for
It's
you.
for the
No.
commission to
Well, it's
attend.
not.
No.
I couldn't all of a sudden, I'm like, oh.
But you're certainly welcome. Let us be
You're
clear.
welcome. Yes.
If you'd like to attend, you're certainly welcome to attend. But
And
that,
you're welcome for me clarifying. that You didn't have to be there.
Our meeting's on the 27th.
yes,
And it's gonna just be
just right now it is advertised to be just the final action on that topic.
1 hour.
You know, that answers the question, because the public comment period ends on the 17th.
Yes,
right? Yeah.
exactly.
I was wondering.
Yes.
Which is the reason why we had to set another one. Based upon our last commission meeting, I think it was you and the chair both had some concerns that we had those done before the fish regulations were printed.
Right.
That's what we're trying to ensure in that December 27th meeting.
I almost hate to suggest it, but there's no way to squeak in the correction of the Big Hole date setting if we wanted to do that.
If you're Vice Chair Tabor, Chair Robinson, if you're speaking to tomorrow's agenda, we think
Not
that.
tomorrow, I know that.
Okay.
In time for the 27th meeting.
Procedurally, that is within your authority, within your decision space to influence the agenda that way. We'd have to make sure that got noticed and so everybody could see and understand that and expect that would be one of the conversation and decision points for the commission on the 27th.
That's a great catch. Yeah.
I mean, it's an opportunity if we're doing, the regulations and everything, it's sneaking it in there and getting it in there, because I think that was a miscommunication across the board. Parties were working, you may recall. It was kind of like today. We were working up to the 11th hour trying to get to the right decision on the Big Hole. And we just dipped too late in the spring.
And treated Big Old Beaverhead the same.
Right. And just didn't get caught in time to walk it back. So if there's a way to squeak it in there, since we're gonna be doing this anyway for the other things, that would be, I think, ideal. I mean,
Yeah, again, there is, so procedurally, and with your authority, there is room to do that. I'd look to the director, I'd look to the chair. So staff says, we can figure that out. We can post the agenda appropriately. We can provide the briefing papers appropriately. The December 27th date allows us to insert any changes in the regulation booklet. It might delay depending on the extent of the change. Sometimes you tweak this and in a print copy, it reciprocates down through 16 pages. That sort of edit that takes place, but short of those sorts of things, doable.
Becky, when would the appropriate time during our meeting tomorrow be to bring that up? Would we do it during the meeting?
No, you wouldn't bring it up tomorrow. We just notice it, put out press release, ask for public comment at the meeting on the December 27th. So you would have to take public comment, obviously, during that meeting, but you would just do it all in that meeting.
May make it longer, it will make it
It
longer
will
than
make
an
it
hour.
longer than an hour, likely.
And what time?
Be
of the day?
refreshing to get positive comments.
You need me to send you some?
Yeah.
I'll send you some.
What time of the day is that meeting? Isn't it evening?
9 o'clock.
The morning.
Oh, it is
10.
morning.
9 to 10.
Now it's 9 to 12.
It
need to
was
go
9
back.
to 10.
it's just kind of an important fix, that.
Thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, it's the perfect time to do it. We already have something.
But if you open it up tomorrow, yeah.
Yeah, we can.
Madam Chief.
Mhm.
Real quick, on the statewide thing, joint permits, any question on that is, where that came from, and well, and we heard people saying, if you draw a permit, you should make that sort of thing. The idea was to keep people from spreading all over and doing it, so that's why that's on. There. They're looking for people in the state. So,
And there does seem to be pretty strong consensus across all the groups for that. So, you know, if we are going special permit for some of the other things as well, it makes sense.
Are there any questions or clarifications needed still? Well, specific.
I'd like to go to dinner with you tonight, but we got a lot of work. So
We specifically start at 8:30 or we're gonna like start 6:30?
Officially 8:30.
Okay.
I have, Shauna, is that, the 317, is that where, what is that room that we're meeting in?
It's where finance, you remember where finance and claims meets?
Okay.
Big room on the- as far west as you can get on the third, or as east far as you east. get on the third
Okay,
floor.
I have no sense of directions.
yeah,
Or the rooms changed.
yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
So if you just keep going past
So we're not looking.
the room that we were in last time, just keep walking
Oh,
down
sure,
that hall.
sure.
So is this
You'll get
so
to
we
where it
won't
ends.
look down on
Oh,
people?
sure.
Yeah,
I
that's
know,
right.
sorry.
Yeah.
Go, like a closet kind of thing.
I was at that level.
Yeah, and actually the cell phone is better, so you have to be concerned about being able to see people. in the picture. So you should be able to set that up.
Okay.
Kind of new shape.
Okay.
And the only thing tonight, a lot of, this is why we meet each other, talk to each other, don't talk. Then you got forums and you can't do that, you can't talk anything about commission activities. So I know you all want to, but don't. please.
Unless you break apart in groups of 3 or less.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
The Winbig doesn't take reservations, but we could probably still get a table.
Table for 3.
Tables for 3.
They're all out.
Make one for each table.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's right up the road.
Do you want us to meet in the lobby and walk over there then?
That'd be great.
At what time?
What time do you guys want to leave at 6?
Time to get over there and check in.
Meet in the lobby at 6.
Or so, let's say 6:15.
Okay, 6:50.
At least one call.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'll do my best to join y'all. I'll get out of here as soon as my next appointment's over and hopefully at least have time to share a beer with you.
Sounds
Yeah,
good.
Sounds
safe travels.
Thank you, sir.
Thank y'all.